happening, everybody? And welcome to another edition of the Gimme presented by Bet365. Why do we call it the Gimme? Because it's good. That's why. And yes, our long national nightmare. Whoa, deep breath. It's finally over. The PGA Tour is back. 18 long days between the final round of the Tour Championship and the first round of this week's Fortinet Championship out in Napa, one of 7 events on the PGA Tour fall schedule. Not quite last season, not exactly next season, just this nebulous FedEx Cup piece in between where guys are jockeying for position, getting into next year's signature events and some major championships. So a lot to play for, obviously, just 2 weeks before the Ryder Cup. He is Spencer Aguiar. I'm Jason Sobel. Coming up, we're going to give you our favorite outright plays, props, matchups, first round leader bets, one and dones for the crazies out there that are doing one and done pools here in September. I love you guys. You're not the casuals who start in January. I love the guys who start in September with the beginning of the year. But first, before we go any further, as mentioned, the Gimme is presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION, ACTION, to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer in New Jersey, Colorado, Ohio, Virginia, and Iowa here in the U.S. At $1, get $365 in bonus bets. Terms and conditions apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Taking a look at the top of the board at Bet365 this week. No surprise, the name at the top is the guy who's going for the three-peat this week. Max Homa has won 2 in a row. Got some help from Danny Willett last year at Silverado. He is plus 700. All right. Want to talk to you, Spencer. Going to bring you in here on the second name on the board, tied for the shortest odds with Sahith Theegala. Is Justin Thomas the much talked about controversial captain's pick? He will be on the Ryder Cup team in 2 weeks. Has not played his best golf this year. At 14-1, it feels like a very short number on Justin Thomas, but it's a fall field. It's not a lot of big names either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem when you look at this tournament. Like, unfortunately, you do get on the surface this watered down field here. And when that's the case of what takes place, you're going to have to pick and choose your spots of where you're going to go. And I think with Thomas here, I like him. And I just want to preface that beyond anything else. I wish he wasn't 14-1. I didn't get a ticket on him. I don't know how I'm going to play him. Maybe that's a DFS answer at the end of the day. I don't think people are going to go there with that price tag that you have on some of these salary slates out there. But this is a very nice bounce back spot for him. It doesn't mean that he turns it all around. He's been bad for a little bit. We kind of saw him a little bit better in his last start there. He almost chipped in to really turn it all around. But I don't know, Jason. Do you have any thoughts on Thomas here?
I think we're going to get a very focused, intense Justin Thomas. This is not a JT that's going to come out smiling, kissing babies, signing autographs, and like, hey, I'm just here to drink some wine and hang out and get a little Ryder Cup prep. This is going to be major championship game face JT this week. He knows that he's got pressure on him, and it's more about not winning this week as long as he plays well. Make the cut, play well, get on the leaderboard at some point, and I think he takes some of the pressure off himself. If he shoots 74, 75 this week, he is well aware of all the controversy surrounding his pick. He's well aware that a lot of people who are supporting the U.S. team are not supporting him being on the U.S. team. If he misses the cut this week and goes in cold 2 weeks from now to Rome and plays the Ryder Cup, he understands just how much more pressure there's going to be on him. So I would think he wants to play well, not just to play well, but I think he wants to play well to gain some momentum and have some of that going into the Ryder Cup a few weeks from now. So as mentioned, he is tied for second on the board with Sahith Theegala. We're going to give you some Theegala odds that opened up at a bigger number, but he has now worked his way down to 14-1 with JT. Cam Davis at 20-1, Steven Yeager at 22-1, Bo Hostler rounds out that top tier at 25-1. As always here on the show, we've been given $100 to bet in our portfolios. We're going to start with some outrights. Spencer, who's your first guy?
So I think you need to ask yourself 2 questions this week when you're building an outright card. One would be, do you believe the top of the board is worth the decrease in price from their typical going rates? And then 2, if that answer ends up being yes, is it because the bottom of the board is inferior in quality from what we typically see during a standard week? I'm going to be transparent with you, Jason. I did bet JJ Spawn 40 to 1. Kevin, you at 80 to 1. Those are two freebies I'll give out on this show that you're not going to hear. My model did find that decrease in quality the further we slipped down the board for multiple reasons. There were only 5 players teeing it up who averaged a finish better than 35th place over the previous 10 weeks inside of my recalculated portion of the model. There were nearly 100 players who exceeded an average finish of over 60th on the leaderboard during that same time frame when grading all missed cuts as an 80th place result inside of my sheet. So no matter how I shook the data, it kept landing me in this range where I wanted to bet one of these favorites. I talked a little bit about Justin Thomas. I couldn't get there at the 14 to 1 price. I'm going to start my card here with Steven Yeager at 30 to 1. That was inside the Bet365 enhanced market for $6. Unfortunately, that number has slipped a little bit more into that 27 to 1 range as of us recording, Jason, but I thought anything over 25 to 1 still had enough meat on the bone to take a shot. Yeager's driver turned into a massive weapon during the season because of his added distance throughout the year. My model seemed to believe that he was the top projected scorer when recalculating these 18 holes at Silverado. And then the current tee to green production over the last 24 rounds also landed him number 1 when looking into all entrants in this field. We know about the potential issues with the putter. I'm not going to get into that on this show, but my sheet graded him just inside the top 40 in putting when given a firm bent plus POA mix. I'm comfortable this week aggressively attacking the same names that I backed last season, which just naturally made Yeager and his ball striking portfolio a really natural fit for me to start my card here.
Yeah, he makes a lot of sense. He's a guy for me that every time I look at him in the field on a Saturday, Sunday, and I'm starting to do my research, I really like him. And every time the number comes out on Monday morning, it's just too short for me to get there. And for a guy who hasn't won before, and granted, I'm about to give you 2 names of guys who have not won before, so I absolutely understand the contrarianism that I'm dealing with here, but it's just a little too short for me to get there for a guy that's not a proven winner. All of that said, we're talking non-proven winners, and let's talk about Sahith Theegala, because I just mentioned a few minutes ago, he is currently at 14 to 1 on the Bet365 board, but as you see the graphic here, he is 20 to 1 on my card. I was able to jump on Theegala first thing Monday morning as I wrote in my column at the Action Network this week. I wanted him to be my favorite outright play. I wanted him to be at 25 to 1. I couldn't quite get there at 20 to 1. It makes a lot less sense at 14 to 1. But I think that targeting Theegala on a West Coast event, Poana Greens, with an inferior field, it's everything lined up for the way he's going to finally win that first PGA Tour event. Look, he's one of the few guys in the field. Yeager, Cam Davis. I'm going to talk about Andrew Putnam in a few minutes, but guys who don't necessarily need to be there this week. They're not even prepping for the Ryder Cup. They don't have to worry about their PGA Tour cards for next year. They're there for a reason. They're there to go win a golf tournament. Sahith is, I'm telling you, he is hell-bent on winning that first PGA Tour event. It's going to happen sooner rather than later. I don't want to not be on it, because I've been on him so much over the last 2 years. So I'm going to bite the bullet and take him here. But granted, I took him earlier at 20 to 1. If he had opened at 14 to 1, I might not be saying his name right now, Spencer.
Yeah, and like that's kind of the thing with me. You got a better number than I did, Jason. And if you really shopped around, you may have been able to find a 22 to 1 out there, but I ended up also taking him at 19 to 1 for $9. And it pretty much came down to 2 core reasons for why I wanted to back him beyond everything that you just said. Players only hit the short grass 52% of the time here at Silverado. That might sound dangerous on the surface since Theegala's accuracy isn't necessarily his calling card. However, the push towards this bomb and gouge mentality was really pronounced when looking into this tight setup that did have sporadic spacing between those trees located inside the rough. For that reason, my model believed that the distance exceeded anything else when looking at off the tee data. Those numbers helped to propel Theegala from 56th to 30th in weighted strokes gain total with the driver. And then when I took this another step, and this is really the key for me here, you get a shockingly high 51.2% of approaches that occur between 0 to 150 yards. That ended up giving him an 87 spot improvement inside of my model for weighted proximity specifically for this course. You know, I do believe we're trending in that direction of a win after he closed the last calendar season with back-to-back top 15 finishes. You talked about this trending in this direction even at this tournament. This is a really nice spot for Theegala. It doesn't mean that this ends up being where he ends up winning, but the movement is sharp in my opinion. And there's a reason why, if you want to call it the 19s or the 20s that we got, or the 22 to ones that were out there very early on Monday, there's a reason why this is now 14 to 1. Like, this is real money moving Thagala in this market.
Yeah, I think all of that makes a whole lot of sense. And again, if you had told me he opens at 14 to 1, I'm not sure I jump on it. So I understand if some are reticent here on a Tuesday evening to look at Thigala's number and go, do I want to get it now? I can understand it if you don't. Just a thought, he does tee off in the afternoon wave on Thursday. Maybe if you guys go super low, that includes Max Homa playing Thursday morning. Maybe that pushes that number back in the other direction a little bit further, and you jump on him even before he tees off. So my second outright play this week, I will preface this by saying I think the fall schedule is a really nice place to target some players that you've liked throughout the year, that you've bet throughout the year, that haven't necessarily come to pass, at least as far as outrights, but you're like, still on my radar, still like the guy. For me, one of those players is Justin Suh. Very impressed with him. I know the numbers. You look at it, tee to green, and it's essentially PGA Tour average, which, look, there's nothing wrong with that. When we say average at the highest level of the game, it's not necessarily a bad thing because his putter is very, very good. He was sixth, I believe, or fifth on the PGA Tour in strokes gained putting for the 22-23 season. So he gets that bump on the greens again. I'm going to tell you all about the West Coasters. Another West Coaster who's going to be comfortable on Poa annua greens this week at 45 to 1. This is a guy that I've targeted as someone who has some win equity. I love just when I've spoken with him. He's got some, he's a cerebral type of golfer. This is a player who, at the PGA Championship, when he was on the leaderboard at Oak Hill a few months ago, told me when I asked about his strategy, he said, well, on some holes, I'm aggressive off the tee and conservative with my approach shots. Other holes, conservative off the tee, aggressive with the approach. It's not just the red light, green light thing. He's got a lot of different things working, and I really enjoyed and appreciated the way he explained how he was going about his mindset on the golf course. So he's a guy that I do think is going to win sooner rather than later, just like Thigala. 45 to 1, I think, is a really nice number for Justin Suh this week. Talking about this golf course a little bit, Silverado Resort, the North Course there, playing just over 7,100 yards, par 72. There will be some birdies. Max Homa, as mentioned, the two-time defending champion, he did get some help last year as Danny Willett, the former Masters champion, three-putted from 4 feet on the final green to essentially give Max Homa that victory. After Homa had chipped in, it was really a wild last 4 minutes of the tournament. Crazy turn of events there. So let's get into the player finishing position markets for Bet365 this week. We're going to buy one. We're going to sell one. Spencer, you're playing by the rules this week, I hear.
For this portion, we'll see as we move across this show, but Garrick Higo, 51st or better, minus 120 for $14. I tried to find a way to fit Higo onto my outright card. I couldn't quite get there because of the lack of upside appeal in my model, but his combination of distance and, yes, I know this is not a good answer to give here, but poor iron play kind of resembled the makeup of Cameron Champ, who won the title here in 2019. We're both going to get to Champ here in a second when talking about this in a different side of the market, but Higo cracked the top 50 of all 7 statistical categories that I ran at the Fortinet. His 6 top 50 finishes over the last 8 tournaments has shown a floor that we hadn't seen earlier in the year. And then despite that shaky iron play that I just mentioned, he still graded 15th when adding distance and weighted proximity together. I think that ability to spray the ball off the tee can be a good thing. But as I said, we'll get to the other side of that answer here shortly when we do move into Champ.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And yeah, we're going to talk a lot about Cameron Champ in a minute here, the winner from a few years ago. I'm going to buy Doug Gim. Doug Gim is a guy who's sort of cruising under the radar, low ceiling, high floor. I mean, we talk about guys, Higo is a great example. Cameron Champ might be the ultimate example, who have a high ceiling and a very low floor. And there's this wide dispersion rate between them. Doug Gim is a guy that, I don't know if I see Doug Gim winning an event in the next 12 months. Could he? Sure. But I certainly see him having some solid finishes. In fact, he's finished 46th or better in 7 of his last 9 starts. That's all we're looking for this week at minus 120. The number makes sense. I'm going to throw 10% of my portfolio on Doug Gim. And again, I'm just looking for the floor. I don't need to hit the ceiling. And Doug Gim, he is a nice floor play. All right. as you mentioned, I think we're selling the same guy this week, aren't we?
We are, and I just really quickly want to touch on Doug Gim because I think you brought up a lot of interesting points with him. Just even moving forward with him as a golfer here, that had been a player that had this really boom or bust nature to him, and we're not getting that anymore with him closing the season with 8 made cuts and 9 starts. That was highlighted by 7 results landing inside the top 35 of those fields. So if Gim ends up becoming a steadier golfer, I think he's really interesting to keep an eye on for in DFS, in head-to-head matchups. I think it's a really good bet here in a finishing position market on Bet365. But I just wanted to double down on that answer because I like your Gim play there. But yeah, when we're looking at Cameron Champ, I took him 50th or worse, minus 120, $14 once again. I can see how Champ won here when he was in form. My model believes he's a top 5 short course player who carries a distance advantage almost every week, especially when there's going to be room to miss off the tee. But it's hard for me not to feel like this is a spot where his past victory has been baked way too far into this number. Back-to-back missed cuts at this venue will show the downside. The form did see a little bit of progress recently over his 2-year baseline, although I just couldn't get past the 135th place rank in my sheet I had for him in weighted strokes gained total, and then the 148th place mark for par 4 scoring between 400 to 450 yards and weighted proximity from 0 to 150 yards. Most of these par 4s land in that exact range that I'm talking about. So the reason why we get this heightened mark here between 0 to 150 yards. There's just too many red flags for me. And if you're telling me, and it looks that way for me in the market, that we are getting this boost in pricing because of this, because I think without that victory, we're probably looking at a golfer that Bet365 is putting out there, I don't know, an over-under of 68th, 69th. Like it doesn't mean, and I want to preface this, it doesn't mean that he can't land inside the top 50, but I feel like this is much more of a miscut candidate than anything else. And if we're talking about a 15 spot disparity between my model and what the market is saying, like that's a pretty good advantage for us to try to take a bet on here.
So full disclosure, you and I do not discuss these bets before we start doing the show. And you and I just happen to have the same exact player that we're selling this week. I understand the outright number being sort of short on Cameron Champ because quite frankly, over the first 4 or 5 years of his PGA Tour career, when he plays well, he wins golf tournaments. It's happened 3 times. It's really happened out of nowhere. So it's not even like you can catch him when he's got that upward trajectory. That said, it's not been happening anytime lately for him. He's finished 50th or worse in 15 of his last 17 starts. I mean, what more kind of sample size do we need than that? He's just not playing good golf. Back when he was playing his better golf a few years ago, he was gaining on average 1 to 2 shots off the tee against the field. Now it's half a shot against the field. He's still hitting it a long way. He's not longer than Rory McIlroy or a few other players, though, that are out there right now. And just quite frankly, he's not gaining those strokes off the tee. The iron play is not terrific. It's below average right now. The around the greens play is really poor. He's lost strokes around the greens in 22 of his last 25 starts. The other 3 have barely been above average. And so what's happening, I mean, it's not hard to read when you look at the analytics. Essentially, he's not hitting it way past everybody else anymore. He's missing greens. He's not getting up and down from those greens. Well, that's a really bad formula. And at some point, that's not going to lead to good results anymore. And it hasn't been recently. I don't see it changing or turning around anytime soon. So again, 15 of his last 17 outside the top 50. We're taking him outside the top 50 this week. Just everything seems to work as far as fading Cameron Champ. If you can find him to fade in some matchups, I like that as well. Let's get to, speaking of matchups, props and matchups. I know you said you weren't going to play by the rules totally. So you're not taking a prop. You'll take 2 matchups. What's the first one?
Yeah, New Year's, same me. I just like making up my own rules on this show. But I will start with Nate Lashley minus 120 over MJ Duffy for $28. Duffy had this hot run of 6 consecutive made cuts before missing the weekend to end his season at the Wyndham Championship. I do think a lot of that stretch is being baked into his price here at a venue where he has failed to post better than a 72nd place finish in 2 tries. If you dive into his data at the course, you will see that last year's performance was unraveled by his putter losing 7.2 shots to the field. That's not something I would expect to happen again. Still, it just comes down to this combination of poor weighted proximity since he loses most of his better ranges from outside of 150 yards, That caused him to fall 59 spots in my projection inside the model. And then this long-term return of faulty performances on scoreable courses. I think on the flip side of that answer, Lashley was a golfer who flirted with top 20 production inside of my model each time I ran the data to mimic Silverado. Consider betting him as an outright. Kind of liked him more here in a matchup sort of a state here. 9 of his last 11 tournaments, he's made the cut. I think this is a nice spot to take on Duffy and do it with Lashley.
I think that makes sense. I'm going to give you a prop that's very, very conservative here. I like to play some bigger number outrights, and I like to take some chances of some long shots here and there. So I want to be conservative at times too. And this is perhaps overly conservative, but Beau Hossler for a top 20 this week makes way too much sense. He's played well at Silverado in the past. Yes, again, another guy who's from the West Coast originally and has those ties. 3 of his last 4 starts at the end of the 22-23 season were inside the top 20. And I'm going to give you a little analogy here. So back in, I believe it was April or May when they had the Zurich Classic, Beau Hossler played with his friend Wyndham Clark. Wyndham Clark is a guy who up until this year had the best 2 clubs in his bag were driver and putter. Everything in between, pretty good, but you can get away with having a really good driver and a really good putter and having some good weeks out there. Well, as soon as those irons and wedges heated up for Wyndham Clark, easier said than done, but he turned himself into a world-class player and major champion. I don't know that Beau Hossler is going to make that same type of leap, but I do think that he can do it, and I do think that it's going to be a similar type of trajectory. He's a guy that hits it really well off the tee and makes a lot of putts. That's a really good starting point. I mean, that's like taking, if you've got an NBA player who hits a lot of 3-pointers and can drive to the rim, at some point you fill it in with everything in the middle, and he's going to be an all-star player. That's what I see from Beau Hossler. I mean, we saw him contend for a U.S. Open title 11 years ago when he was a teenager. We've all known that he's had the talent for a long time. I expect him, when I write my column on The Leap in January, guys that I think are going to make a jump to the next level, Beau Hossler is going to be very much on that list because I think he's due for a very, very good campaign moving forward. All right, one more matchup from you, Spencer.
Yeah, and sharp markets really like Hossler this week. That's one of the things I've noticed. And it's kind of a good segue into this matchup that I'm going to take here because I'm taking on a golfer who has a very similar profile in a lot of ways of what we just talked about with Hossler. I like Hossler a lot more. It's not the same price range, but JJ Spawn minus 120 over Lucas Herbert for $28. I think this goes one of 2 ways for Herbert. The first is that it's that Hossler answer that you just talked about. The distance, the putter, that carries him. I will say, though, on top of all of that, my model has some massive concerns because of the proximity totals. It isn't impossible that he generates one of these high-end outcomes because the numbers are there for a spike week. But the alternative would be that 145th place rank for weighted proximity, 107th place grade for weighted scoring, 111th place mark tee to green. He's missed a bunch of cuts here recently. This would be his 5th out of his last 7 if he doesn't make the weekend here. I'm sort of in that 50-50 way of how Herbert actually performs when all is said and done. If he misses the cut, I wouldn't be shocked. If he performs, I wouldn't be shocked. But what I like about this bet is Spawn ended up grading as one of the better values I had on this board because of his 18 straight rounds of shooting par or better. I think this is a really good golfer that I have safety in my model by trying to back him. I'm willing to take on the erratic profile here of Herbert. Kind of just one of those things where it's going to be a boom or bust play. Like if Herbert ends up winning the golf tournament, I understand that's the risk that comes into play here. It's that Hossler profile. I just don't see it. I think there's too many red flags in the repertoire of what he's trying to put together. I really like Spawn. As I said, he's kind of a top 15 play for me this week.
Yet another West Coast specialist,
Yes.
a Poana Green specialist. I really do like JJ Spawn as well. And essentially, the way I'm looking at it this week, if you've got a Dodgers hat or a Giants hat somewhere in your closet, I'm probably playing you somewhere. You know what? I'm going to have to amend that. Maybe a Seattle Mariners hat because my next guy is from the Pacific Northwest, but again, understands how to play on West Coast style courses. And that's Andrew Putnam. I'm taking Andrew Putnam in a matchup at minus 120 over Matt Kuchar. Kuch just doesn't do a whole lot for me. Can I say him on a leaderboard? Sure. But Andrew Putnam's a guy that, he might have been the sneakiest player, Spencer, on the PGA Tour in the past season that just concluded. And I don't mean that even as a backhanded compliment. It's just that you never really saw Andrew Putnam on TV too much. you never really saw his name on the leaderboard too much. And then you look in BMW Championship, top 50 on the FedEx Cup points list. There he is, not only playing, but finishing top 10 in that event. He's now in all the signature events for next year, all the rich get richer events that he's going to be involved in moving forward. I think he's in a great spot. He's made 9 cuts in a row. I talked about Doug Gim having an increasingly high floor. Andrew Putnam's got a very high floor. He's proven that over the past year. I'm still waiting for that ceiling to get bumped up a little bit, but you don't need it in a matchup. I'll still play the floor in a matchup, and who knows, even just making the cut this week might be able to cash this one against Kuchar on a Friday afternoon. All right, let's take a look at the Gimme prop. That's right. We got our own Gimme prop at Bet365. It's your guy, Mr. Roast Your Swing, Max Homa, the 2-time defending champion. We have boosted him for a top 5 this week. He doesn't even have to win. All he's got to do is finish in the top 5. Was plus 200, boosted to plus 225. So if you go to Bet365 and search for the Gimme prop, you can get Max Homa. Again, all he's got to do is be in the top 5 this week. Doesn't have to go for the three-peat. Let's get into our first round leader plays, Spencer. Where are you going with yours?
I'm going to go back to Steven Yeager, 40-1. Only going to put $1 on this. This is never a market that I'm in love with weekly, but Yeager does have the potential to skyrocket up this leaderboard if he can give us any sort of an outlier round with the putter. The high-end metrics in my sheet were all over him, really any way that I ran it. And, maybe this is one of those things, Jason, if you don't trust him over the entire 4 days of a golf tournament to actually win the event, this is a pretty good shot to try to take it for one round at 40-1.
Exactly what I'm doing with my play. Not many players have been as volatile over the last 9 months as Cam Davis. He's got 6 top 10s and 10 missed cuts. He's been all over the place. Really hard to predict, but I don't have to nail him down for 4 days. I just have to get him playing his best golf for one day on Thursday. The tee times came out earlier today. He's afternoon. I would have liked a morning tee time a little bit better. That said, I will play the volatility play in Cam Davis, who's got as much talent as just about anybody in this field. So at 35-1, he can certainly pop. First of all, before we get to our one and done, Spencer, are you in any one and done pools that start this week?
I guess I'm not as much of a diehard as some of the people out there. I unfortunately can't give an answer of yes. I usually start it up at the Sony, but I think it's a great concept. Like anybody who wants to continue this, it's a great time to start this because you do get to play a lot of these players. Like one of the things I love to do, Jason, is I love to have one and done pools where we take 2 people just because, a little bit more knowledge there comes into play. This is kind of what happens when you start earlier in the season. You can play guys like Steven Yeager and some of these players who may not make it if you start at the Sony Open. So there is a skill advantage more so, I think, the more tournaments that you can put out there.
Agreed. I don't run any of my one and done pools, so we don't start until January. If I was running it, I'd be like, come on, September. Don't worry about your fantasy football team. We're starting. I do have a DraftKings weekly league that I do with just a bunch of buddies from the club that I play golf with who are golf fans, but maybe not following it to the extent that you and I are. And so I'll say to them, hey guys, there's a golf event. Why don't we all throw in some money this week in our DraftKings? I know it's not fair, but I'll have a little edge in that one, certainly. So in any case, for those who are playing one and dones, we salute you. If you're looking for a one and done play, you going much further than some of your main picks that you've already given us so far?
No, I'm going to go with what would probably be standard for anybody who's made it through this show of what you would expect me to say here. I'm going to partially do this to be different from your play. I did see who you were going to take. We don't discuss this, but I saw the name there. I don't want to give the same play. I think it's better if we give opposite plays here. So I'm going to take Steven Yeager. It feels like a nice spot to grab one of the favorites during an event that will place him as, arguably a top 5 player in this field. First in weighted scoring, first in strokes gained tee to green over the past 24 rounds. Top 5 in weighted par 5 scoring and expected total driving. I think there's a lot to like about his chances in Napa this week.
Yeah, and I don't feel like if you take Yeager in a one and done this week that you're like, oh man, I can't believe I used him up. I won't have him for whatever it is down the road. I feel like that's certainly fine. And I'm going to take Sahith Theegala. And for every reason that you look at the number right now and say, boy, the second shortest outright odds in the field, I don't know if I want to take him at that number. That's for the same reason you look at that and go, at what point over the next 11 or 12 months is Theegala going to be have the second best probability of winning a golf tournament. I don't know if we're going to see that again. And so take it while you can get it. I understand that he might have a chance of going to win. You might even want him in a major championship by the time next summer rolls around. That said, his chances, his probability of winning is better this week than it will ever be for the rest of the season. So I'm going to take him this week. A little recap. Spencer has Jaeger and Theegala outright. He's buying Higo, selling Cameron Champ. Matchups on Lashley and Spawn, first round leader, again on Jaeger. I'm taking Theegala and Justin Suh outright, buying Gim, selling Champ. Prop play on Bo Hostler, a matchup on Andrew Putnam, first round leader, Cam Davis. That's all we got, guys. Thank you. We appreciate you watching this episode of the Gimme presented by Bet365. Remember, for more content, check out actionnetwork.com or the Action Network app. We're going to have a ton of content this week, and check back very soon. I'm working on a lot of Ryder Cup stuff. Our next show will be in 2 weeks for the Ryder Cup. Tons of content coming your way, so stay tuned for all that. For Spencer Aguiar, I'm Jason Sobel. Good luck with all of your bets for the Fortinet Championship this week. Here's hoping you guys hit the green.